My name's Geoff Shaffer. Steve and I were longtime friends. We met each other spending our summers together in northern Michigan. And my memories of Steve are unbelievable and mostly would be centered around the fact that Steve was probably the funniest guy I ever knew. Steve had this uncanny ability to make others laugh and sometimes even at his own expense. And I will always remember him for that and miss that part of him because again, there's never been anyone that I've been around that made me laugh so hard over the 30 plus years that I was able to spend time with Steve. Thanks.
Hey, I'm John Atkins from Pittsburgh. I know Steve from college. We met our freshman year at IU and became buddies very quickly. We both had the same sort of nefarious interest in pushing the envelope and having fun together. And Larry made reference earlier today to the John in the car who vouched for Steve and enabled him to get a hall pass on that trip to that Grateful Dead show. I would be that John who vouched for Steve. And I'm grateful that I did. So this has been a fantastic weekend. I'm so glad I was able to come out here. I did have the pleasure of seeing Steve 3 times in the last year, once when he was healthy, twice when he was ill, once when he was very, very ill, and had a chance to say goodbye to him. Like Anthony, I realized in retrospect that I didn't take the opportunity to thank Steve, but I hope he knows how important he was to me. I did tell him that, and he asked me why. And I told him that he made me a better person, and he asked me how. And of course, this is towards the end, so I think that Steve was wrestling with lots of things at that time. And he wanted to know why I felt that he had made me a better person. And of course, in keeping with our relationship, I told him that I watched how he did things, and I tried to behave in the complete opposite manner, and it made me a better person in doing so. And of course, he laughed and gave me a big hug. And I wish that I would have taken some time to have given him a more serious explanation as to why he meant so much to me. And I'm not sure that I could have clearly articulated that to him. The love that I had for Steve was not something that I was able to clearly articulate to people when asked. And I've had some conversations today about how some people who spoke earlier today did capture much of what those feelings are, and I'm grateful for that, to be able to go home with maybe a better understanding as to why Steve was so important to me. I don't know that it's necessary for me to go home with that, because the love that I had for him it didn't need to be explained to anybody. But anyway, I am grateful for that. Steve is one of the most remarkable people that I've ever known for lots of reasons, not least of which is he had the capacity to make you forgive him for some ridiculous behaviors, because at the end of the day, you just wanted to be around him. And I treasured those moments with him. And I am deeply, deeply saddened that I won't have any of those moments going forward. I will hold on to these memories. He will never be forgotten. And he has left trademark sayings, expressions, mannerisms, gestures that all of us have taken on and have become part of our everyday vernacular. And I think that we all know that he was the origin for all of these things. So those will be tributes to him each and every time we get together, and those kinds of things have the dust blown off them and they're brought out. But more importantly, Steve will go with me in my heart as I travel through life and try to use some of the things that he's taught me in the way that one deals with people. And some things, quite frankly, I won't be able to use because I'm not Steve, and only he could pull that stuff off. But I love Steve. Steve, I love you. Thank you so much. And it's my last time in this amazing home where we've had so much great time together, and I will be sure that I do something to leave some little trademark. I'll trash it somehow for you, buddy. I promise you that. Anyway, I love you, and I love everybody here. Bye.
My name is Thea Flaum. I'm Jonathan Flaum's mother. I knew Steve from the time when he was 13 years old, and he started at Parker, and he became such a close friend of Jonathan's. And the story I want to tell is the story about just after Steve had met Susan. For some reason, Steve and I were together, And he'd known me a long, long time. I'd known him since he was really virtually a little boy. And he wanted to tell me that he'd fallen in love. And he even looked different. He didn't look like the usual Steve. His face had a glow about it. And his eyes were shining. And he said, "Mrs. Flaum, I have something important to tell you. I have fallen in love. I am in love. I want you to know that I have met the woman that is the major person in my life, and that I've fallen in love, and that no matter what, I'm going to get her to marry me. No matter what." I said, "Steve, where is she?" And she was someplace far away. I think now, Susan told me she was in Texas. And we were, I'm not sure where we were, but we were not in Texas. And I said, "Well, Steve, how are you going to do that?" And he said, "I'm never, ever, ever going to stop, because I'm sure, and I love her, and I'm going to marry her because she is the great love of my life." So Ava and Jack and Susan, I've told this story to Susan, but Ava and Jack, I want you to know how much your dad loved your mom and how much she changed his life and changed him when he fell in love. And it was great for me to see it and to know, and I'm always going to be happy that I have that memory, and now you have it too.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be as funny as others have talking about Steve. I'm going to share one or two remembrances, and then I'm going to say a few other words that others have said, but I want to repeat, and I want to emphasize certain qualities of Steve's that we all admire so much. And I will speak in the present tense because he's still with us and will always be. And but Steve was hilarious, and as many have attested. And this business about that others mentioned earlier during the memorial service of his being able to make fun of one of your most vulnerable sides or parts of yourself and make it seem hilarious and not so serious. When I was an adolescent, about 16, like many, I had acne. I had some very bad skin, and I was painfully self-conscious about it. And it was awful. But Steve would make fun of me for being embarrassed and being self-conscious, and he would refer to these these areas of my face where the acne was the worst and the most noticeable and unsightly, and he would refer to them as these regionals, not regions, regionals, which sounded like the basketball tournament in the NCAA or something. And it was only because of that I finally maybe relaxed a little bit or felt less embarrassed, and because we shared a good laugh. That was the kind of humor that he possessed, and you cannot be more vulnerable or self-conscious than as a adolescent or a teenager. And that's when I met him, and it was one of the many ways or reasons that he endeared himself to me. I stayed with Steve and his dad in New York City when we were juniors in high school, and that was a tricky business because Steve invited us out, and his dad made it clear after a couple of days it wasn't really the best situation for him or for us. And Steve was really very sorry about that, and my sister and I were there, and we worked it out. We stayed someplace else. It was one of the few times I saw him, so self-contained, with regret, and there were no hard feelings at all. But it was clear, how seriously he took all of that and how responsible he felt. Another very important side of Steve that we don't always see because he really was a prankster in the very best way. And, about that humor, which sort of meets then this other very serious side, there is an incredible intelligence to that kind of comic sense that Steve had, which takes a real understanding of not just people, but the world and other people's interactions, that was genuinely uncommon on his part. And everyone who's here today, everyone in our school knew this about Steve. In our class, the classes ahead of us, we met him as ninth graders in high school, and there was always a respect, which wasn't grudging. I mean, people knew who Steve was, even while people were sort of making fun of him. He always got the last laugh, and not in a bitter way, in a really deeply human way. And he made everyone's life better, for all of that. So we miss him and we love him. And I'm real glad to be here today and to share any part of this with you. Thanks.
Ava and Jack, I am standing here, and I'm thinking of what story to tell you about your dad. And as you probably know already, there are millions of stories about your dad. And I don't want to start with anything too debauched. I think what I'm going to tell you is that it was me who was responsible for getting your dad into a Grateful Dead show in 1985, and that led down a whole nother road for him. And another thing I'm going to tell you is that he was in Chicago after college, and he had met your mom. And I said, Steve, what are you doing in Chicago? Come to Colorado. Come snowboarding, because I lived in Telluride, and he always wanted to be a part of that. He thought that I had kind of found a magic place to be. And one day he called me and he said, Lucy, Susan got a job in Colorado, and we're moving to Colorado. And for every single time I saw him after that, he thanked me for getting him out of the Midwest and getting him and your mom to move to Colorado. So that's a good story. The other one is that it was 1985, and he was at your uncle's house in Southern California working for your uncle. And he called me, or I called him, I don't know how it happened because there were no cell phones, and I said, dude, I'm at a Grateful Dead show in Ventura, California. It's only an hour, come. And he said, do you have a ticket for me? And I said, no, just come. So he showed up, we never ever found each other, and he spent the entire time in the parking lot. And he thanked me for that one too. I loved your dad, and I love you guys too. That's it.
Ava and Jack, and whoever will see this time capsule. In today's memorial, I was the lucky candidate, the man that was in the parking lot of the Grateful Dead show 20 years ago, where Steve came out of nowhere and asked for a ride because I had Illinois plates in my car. And there's an old saying that you can't choose your relatives, but you can choose your friends. And in that absolutely random, once-in-a-lifetime moment, Steve chose me. We were standing in a parking lot of thousands of people, and he came up to our car, he approached us, and based on that one random moment, 20 years later, he's one of the best of my friends, I love dearly. We've been in each other's weddings. He met Susan through one of the other characters that day. And Ava and Jack, know that your dad was a great, great man who cared about you more than anything else, and whose heart was big and his tongue was sharp. But it was because of the immense intellect and wit that he possessed and his love of life. I hope he's remembered fondly, and that his light never dies, and that if you see this years from now, will be reminded and never forget how wonderful a man he was.
So this is for Jack and Ava. We are here just finishing up your dad's memorial. It's both a happy and a very sad day, but I wanted just to talk a little bit about the two of you and Steve. Steve reminded me of the love in the world and how much he loved you too, both Ava and Jack. Jack, obviously you look a lot like your dad and have a lot of his charm and personality. Ava, on the other hand, you also have a lot of his charm and his good looks, and obviously there's a nice amount of your mother involved in both of you. Thank you for being in my life and for allowing me to share your dad with you. I did not go to a lot of concerts with your dad, but I have one quick story. Your dad, about 3 years ago, wanted to go see The Who, which is a band we used to see in high school back in 1984. And they were coming to town. We didn't have any tickets. We went to the Pepsi Center, and Steve assured me we could get tickets to this show. So we had a number of beers at Bronze, which is a bar down near the stadium, and your dad decided it was time to go out to look for tickets, and there were no tickets. So he went to the window to buy tickets, which he would never do at retail. Your dad was somewhat cheap or frugal, and so we went to the ticket counter to buy our tickets, and the lady said, well, I have these and they're in the 50th row, and your dad said, I will not accept those. Please do another search. They did another search, and your dad, being the lucky guy that he was, got tickets for us in the first row of the Who concert that night. So he was a really nice man, really determined, the toughest guy I know, and he really loved and cared about the two of you. And I hope to be a part of your life going forward. Thank you so much.
I really value the speed and the intensity of Steve and I's connection, how well we understood and accepted each other. Something that's really valuable to me and I'll always hold on to. I love you, buddy. I look forward to many adventures with Jack and Ava. We love you guys. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Tim Sheridan, and I also was lucky enough to go to high school with Steve. I started at the same time as Steve. I was also a freshman joining into that fray at the same time, so I had a little bit of that experience as well. But I consider myself, along with everybody else, very lucky to have known Steve. He's somebody who kind of toughened you up and tested your mettle in order to really be welcomed in and prove yourself. I also remain jealous of the friendship that Steve shared with Anthony and John and that closeness. But I had a unique honor with Steve in that after college, I wanted to write. I was loving theater, and I wrote a play. And there was a character in this play, a real smart aleck, wise ass teenager. And I thought of Steve. And so I called up Steve and I gave him the script, and he read it and he called me up.